So today we're going to work on creating a perspective grid in order to draw our line work for our rendering. First thing that we want to start is we want to make marks at the halfway point of the piece of paper that we're working on. The example that I'm using is a standard 8.5 by 11. So the first thing I need to do is make sure that I'm making my marks at my 5.5 in the very, very middle of my page. And I'm going to do that at the top, and I'm going to do that at the bottom. After I have my lines drawn, I'm going to connect them by drawing a line from my top mark to my bottom mark. And then there is my center line for my drawing. The next step is to repeat this process on the sides. So I'm going to draw a mark at 4.25 because I'm working with 8.5-inch paper. And I'm going to do that on my right, and then I'm going to do that on my left, and then I'm going to connect the dots. After I have my two guidelines drawn, I can go back and clean up my drawing. Make sure that you're doing this periodically because you don't want errant marks to get distracting or look unclean. So continue to clean your drawing as needed. The next step is to make the actual grid for the back wall of our stage. So what we want to do is we want to take our scale ruler, make sure that we are in 1/8-inch scale, and then working on that horizontal line in the middle, I'm going to line up at 16 foot, and then I'm going to make marks at every 2 feet going to the right and going to the left. So if I'm at 16, working to the right, I'm going to do marks at 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, and 32. When I work to the left, I'm going to start at 16 and I'm going to do, 14, 12, 10, all the way down until I hit 0. Once I'm finished with that, I'm going to do the same thing with the marks on the top of my page and the bottom of my page. Keep anchoring on that center line, which is our vertical line going through the middle, and make marks every 2 feet going in both directions. The reason why we're putting our marks in the middle is because it gives you an extra way to make sure that everything is lined up as you are drawing your lines. So it's a nice little safety measure as you're learning this process. Our next step is going to be connect the dots. So I'm going to go to those very furthermost lines over to the right, the ones at my 32 feet, and I'm going to connect them. If you look at the line I just drew, it's not going through the middle one. I can see that in my view, it's harder to see on the video. So I can tell that it's not perfectly square. So those middle check marks gave me the ability to see that it's wrong, and I can go back and I can erase that. So here's an illustration of how those middle ones can save your drawing from going sideways. So after I get this erased, I'm going to go back, I'm going to redraw my line correctly. It's going to be going nice and straight and squared off because my measurement is sound. And then I'm going to carry the process on the other side. You may notice that I am using a different ruler than we use in class. This is a clear ruler that's often used for pattern making and costuming. I like it because I can use the lines in the middle to make sure that I am squared off. It is not necessary. You can use your steel ruler. Next thing that we're going to do is we are going to continue doing the same thing that we did on the top and bottom, only on our sides. So our measurements for this were 16 foot total height. So we are going to go and we are going to line up at the 8-foot mark in the middle. And then I'm going to do marks every 2 feet going, north and south of that middle line that I had. So I'm going to go to the right, and then I'm going to go to the left, and then I'm going to do the same thing on top. After I have all of my 2-foot marks checked off, I'm going to connect the lines. You'll notice that I'm only drawing the lines in the middle in between those 2 lines that I did before. I don't want a whole lot of errant lines that I'm going to have to erase later, so this makes it so there's less cleanup for me to do after the fact. So just draw from the middle of your section. Now that I have this completed, I have the full outside perimeter for my grid that I'm making, so I can just start connecting the dots. So for every 2-foot mark that you made, you're going to line up your ruler at the top of the page and the bottom of the page, and you're just going to draw lines connecting those points together like I'm doing. This is creating the horizontal lines for your grid. And again, only stay in the middle section for the little tiny square that or rectangle that we're creating. You don't need to go outside of that box. After you're done, flip your page around and you're going to do the same thing going on the vertical part of your grid. So every 2 feet, line up your ruler with your tick marks and start connecting them together by drawing your lines. Now that your lines are all drawn, you have the back wall completed, so you can go and clean up all of those extra outside lines because you will not need them. Now that you're cleaned up, we can start making the next section. So, fun thing, the back wall is going to be half the size of the front of the grid that we're creating. So the easiest way to do this is notice that your scale ruler is an 1/8 inch. We're going to now work in the 1/4 inch because it's the other side, which is twice as big. And if you know fractions, 1/4 is twice as much as 1/8. So we're going to move to the other side of the scale ruler. We're going to do the exact same measurements that we did before, but now there's going to be twice as much space in between them. If you notice that it's still lining up with your original tick marks, that's a good sign, because what was 2 feet before is now going to look like 4 feet in our measurements that we're drawing. So you should be using every other tick mark that you had done. So you're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to line up to that center. You're going to draw tick marks from, again, anchor to 16 foot. Draw tick marks at 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, and then 32. Then go to the other side and do from 16 to 14 to 12 to 10 and so on until you get to 0. After you complete that on your bottom, you're going to switch and do it on your top. After you do that on the top, you're going to do the same thing before, where you're just going to draw a line to connect the furthermost ones to the right and left to get the outside of the front wall of your grid. Now, it's important to note that this is not the proscenium. This is the front of the grid. This is setting the perspective lines for what we are doing. It is going to be a little bit different. We'll draw the proscenium afterwards, and you'll see how that relates to everything else. So now that you have that done, you're going to rotate your paper, and you're going to do the same thing on the top and bottom. Hopefully you've made note of the fact that, again, we're at 16, so you're going to line up to 8. You're going to go 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 to the right, and then 8, 6, 4, 2, 0 to the left. Do it on the top and bottom, and then again, connect those lines, but stay in between the 2 lines that you just did. Once you finish that, you can rotate your page back, and now we're going to do something slightly different. So for starters, again, clean up, make sure that all those extra outsider lines are on. For the next step, we're going to do something new. We're not going to work on connecting our lines from the top and bottom and sides of the page like we did before. Instead, we're going to draw diagonal lines from the outside edge of our inner box to the corner of the box that we just created. So we're going to do that on all 4 corners. So line up to the corner of the inner grid, to the corner of the outer grid. Take care to make sure that you are precise and lining up with the corners, because if this goes sideways, it will start to make the rest of your perspective grid get a little bit wonky. And then do your final corner, and we'll be good to move on. Now that you have those diagonal corners drawn, what you're going to do is you're going to start by marking out those same 2-foot measurements, starting with the, we're going to do a little bit differently. We can go from 0 on your left to 32 on your right, and then mark every 2 feet And you're going to do that around the entire perimeter of your box. So across the top line, the bottom line, the right, and then the left. Again, every single 2 feet, you should have a mark. And you're still using your 1/4 inch scale. Once you have your tick marks all completed on all 4 sides of your box, you're going to draw a line from the 2-foot mark on the outside box to the 2-foot mark on that inner grid. So just work on drawing lines from each of those 2-foot marks to the next. You'll notice that we'll start doing a little bit of a perspective as you go, because again, you're working from twice as large on your outside box into half the size on your inside box. So that will kind of naturally create that, movement towards your vanishing point down back on your horizon line. Our next step after we finish all of these lines is going to be to draw a diagonal line that will give us where our rest of our grid is going to be created to. So you're going to go to the top left corner of the inner grid, and you're going to go to the bottom left corner of your outer grid. You're going to get your pencil, and you're going to draw a line. After you have that done, you're going to repeat the exact same process on your right. For the next step, you'll notice that you could probably get away with lining up your 2-foot marks for the very, very outside corner and drawing a line. But if you were to continue doing that, you would quickly go off, because every line is going to get a little bit closer together as you get to the middle, because you're going from 1/4 inch scale down to 1/8 inch scale. So it's going to get a little bit tighter as we move back. So how we can do this, instead of using our ruler, is we're going to use our triangle. Now, I am using my fancy clear costuming ruler because I can use the lines on the bottom to square off to the factory edge of the paper. What you can do is use your triangle. So in the same way that I am lining up with those little lines that are in the middle of my ruler, you can use the bottom edge of your triangle, make sure that it lays flat against that bottom edge of your paper, and then you should have a perfect 90-degree to carry that line up. What you're then going to do is you're going to go to every single place where that diagonal line meets one of your horizontal lines, and then you're going to carry a vertical line up. So you can see here, I'm working on sliding my ruler from the left over towards the right. Again, you're going to do this with your triangle, and you're making sure that you are lining up square to the bottom of the edge, just like I'm doing with my pencil right now. And that will give you a 90-degree vertical in order to just go to where you see those intersections of where a diagonal meets the horizontal line. And you're just going to draw a line connecting the dots. And you're going to continue doing this for the rest of the left side, and then you're going to move on and do the exact same process for the right side. Once you finish that, you're going to rotate your paper, and you're going to connect those vertical lines that you just created on both sides of the page. So take your ruler, line up one with the other, and then play a game of connect the dots. When you're finished, you should have this wonderful looking little perspective grid that looks like a stage traveling back in space. So now we need to work on creating the proscenium for the front of the stage. You'll see first I'm cleaning up again. Keep doing that as you go. Before I continue on, I'm going to take a moment to take and use a pen to draw an actual pen line at the back of my grid, just so that it's nice and firm and not going to erase as I do things. So this isn't a terrible choice to make. I'm also going to do it for my my diagonal lines and such, again, just to make sure those are nice and permanent. So our next step in making this is to put the proscenium. So the entire point of this next step in the design is that you're putting it into the actual space of the theater. We already did that with the ground plan. Now we're going to get the idea of what we see from the front. So we need to draw the proscenium arch. So we remember our measurement is 14 foot 8 inches. So we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to start using the inch side of our scale ruler. So it's 14 foot 8 for the height, and then it's going to be 24 foot 6 for the width. I will put those measurements into the description of this assignment in YouTube. So I am going to use the inches side. If you look at we're in quarter inch because we're on that front part of the grid. If you look at the scale ruler, you'll notice when you get to the left of 0, it will have all kinds of tiny little tick marks. If you count those, they'll correspond with the 12 inches that you have that make up your foot. That is how you get your inches. So how you're going to do this is you are going to line up, if we're going back to that center line, 24 foot 6 inches, half of that, you're going to have to do 12 foot 3 inches. So line up the 12 foot mark at your center line, draw a tick mark for where your 12 foot 3 lands. It will be inside your grid. That is fine. The reason why our grid is as wide as it is because we allowed for the fact that things can be off stage. As things go back away from the proscenium, you'll be more likely to see them, but here close at the proscenium, there's going to be a piece of architecture blocking that. You'll see this relationship between things when we get to the end of drawing this proscenium onto our grid. So after you have the 12 foot 3 on your right, you're going to switch over, you're going to mark a tick mark for the 12 foot 3 on your left, and then you're going to the very top of your grid and you're going to make those same 2 tick marks. So after you have those in for the width of your proscenium, you need to get the height. So rotate your page. You're going to go down to the very, very bottom line that you have, all the way to the left of what you see right here. And then you're going to put your measurement on the 14 foot mark. You're going to go all the way up to 0, past that to your 8 inch mark, make a tick mark. You're going to carry your ruler down to the other side. Again, you'll notice I'm not going to the very, very outside. I'm going to where that proscenium measurement was that I did. And then I'm going to make a tick mark there. After I have my tick marks drawn, I can go back and actually draw in my proscenium. So I'm going to line up tick mark to tick mark. I know that they're going up my 14 foot 8 because I've double checked my math. And I'm going to draw a nice and dark line connecting those 2 marks. This line can be heavier than other lines that you've drawn so far. The proscenium is a really important part of your drawing. So if your grid lines are light, you want your proscenium line to be dark and heavy. This is what we would call a heavyweight line. After you have that one done, go and make sure that your verticals are done. Again, you can use your triangle to line up with the very, very bottom of your page, or you can just draw to connect your tick marks using your ruler. Both are fine. Now we have our proscenium, that big heavy box that we kind of inset from everything else. Now we need to get the actual width of the proscenium itself. So we're going to work under the assumption that the proscenium molding is 2 foot wide. So you will notice me do a mistake because I am taking that 2 foot off of the corner of the outside measurement, but we just drew the proscenium on there. So this is Bridget being silly. So I'm going to reset right now. So going from those lines that you just measured for your proscenium, you're going to make a tick mark at 2 feet. So you're going to do 2 feet over to the right, and then 2 feet over to the left. And then you'll notice that I make my 2 feet tick mark. And then what I can do is I can go back to my vanishing point, which is where that horizontal first line crosses with the vertical first line. I'm going to line up my mark so that I'm landing on 3, and then I'm going to draw a line from 3 to 0. That is because the extension of the front of our stage is 3 feet. So this is using perspective to get us that actual amount of extension. You can see how I had messed up before. I had went ahead and drew a line connecting those 2. So when you're finished, go ahead and draw this line by connecting those 2 endpoints for your proscenium that you just made. Once you're finished with this, it is time to clean up everything outside of that proscenium. So get a nice, big, handy ruler. You may find it helpful to go ahead and use pen to lock in that proscenium itself if you want to make sure that doesn't get erased, or you can just be careful and then just carefully erase around everything until, again, everything outside of that proscenium is clean. Once you are done, you can come back and you can measure out the actual thickness for the proscenium arch itself. It's going to be 2 feet, so measure out 2 feet. Pro tip, that's the same measurement you just did for where that little apron starts to kind of angle out. So line up your triangle again to the bottom of the page, and then draw a tick mark at the top 2 feet from the top of it and connect those 2 lines. Do that for the entire outside, and you should have a 2-foot box around the outside edge. And if you need a reminder, this front portion is in 1/4 inch scale. Once you're finished, you should have a drawing that looks similar to the proscenium that you see in front of you. So we have our proscenium arch framing our stage. We have the depth of our stage space. And then we have our little apron extension coming off the front. You can see your horizon line, your center line, and now we're ready to start plotting out where things go in here.